Mamdani had a very easy moral test. He simply had to say, no synagogue should be surrounded by a violent and hateful crowd. He could have condemned the hate. He could have stood with Jewish New Yorkers, but he didn't. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Proudly Jewish, Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. I'm your host, Rabbi Bitton. Today, I want to take a look at an incident that happened in New York just a few weeks ago in front of a Jewish house of worship, in front of Park East Synagogue in Manhattan. There was a protest, and I use that term inaccurately. You'll see why in a moment. A protest against Israel, theoretically, in front of this Jewish house of worship. So I want you to take a look in a moment at what this protest looked like, right? A normal protest doesn't look like this. And then I want to take a look at what Mayor Mamdani had to say about what you'll see in a moment. So here's some footage from this so-called protest in front of this Jewish house of worship. Take a look. Yeah, that doesn't look like much of a protest to me. This looks like a mob. This is a hostile scene in front of a house of worship. I don't care what the reasons are. That's what it is. It's a hostile scene in front of a synagogue. There were reports of aggressive behavior, of anti-Semitic slogans, anti-Israel chants, and intimidation of people trying to enter or leave this house of worship. The sense is that there's a mob. Look at how many police they have in order to hold them back.
Move forward. One step. Move forward. Police line. Move back. Police line. Police line. Move back. People. Police line. There you go. Good job. Good job. Step back. Step back. Get off my neck. Step back. Step back.
This is not a peaceful protest. If you protest against Israeli policy outside a synagogue, and if worshipers need protection, police protection, in order to enter or leave, if the slogan is being shouted, call for not peace, but for the end of the Jewish state, I don't know if you're allowed to or not, but it's hostile. This is not criticism, whether it's legal or not. It's not criticism of a government. It is the targeting of the Jewish state and of Jews for their identity. And really, more than all this, in that moment, I talked about this being hostile. In that moment, Jews don't see people protesting. They see people with intent, with violent intent. What would have happened if the police weren't there? What would have happened? Do the Jews walking by, trying to get into this event, feel safe? What are they thinking?
The protest is growing. They're on both sides on 3rd Avenue and on Lexington. They're now merging over here on Lexington. by 68th Street. The police are trying to lock this down. It's getting more chaotic as the night goes on. I was just attacked and had to be escorted out.
If the police were not there, what would have happened to these Jews? A little conversation? The specter of violence is there. That's what's going on. That's where you get this intimidation and, frankly, hate. That it's a synagogue matters. This is the house of worship. The message was not, we oppose this event. The message was, Jews are accountable. Jews are accountable for Israel, whatever they actually think. Jews are accountable for Israel wherever they are, even here in New York, even at prayer, even in a house of worship. And the message is also not that we are against that, we the protesters, but we hate that and we are willing to act on this with violence, and it'll take police to stop us. That's the message. The fact that society generally does not weigh in on this, that's my sense of things, is a clear message to these protesters that this is okay behavior, right? When you bring rage about Israel to the doors of a synagogue, you're telling Jews there is no separation between your people, your prayer, your community, and the accusations we make against Israel. That is collective blame. Again, I remind you of the hostile nature of this collective blame. And collective blame is classic bigotry. It's one of the oldest patterns of Jew hatred. Now, let's focus for a moment on the leader of New York City, the Mayor Mamdani. Listen to what Mayor Mamdani had to say regarding this so-called protest the next day. Here.
Yes, I think that I've made it clear time and time again that we in this city believe in the sacrosanct nature of the right to protest, and also are committed to ensuring that any New Yorker can safely enter or exit from a house of worship, and that access never be in question, while we also protect the First Amendment. And I do believe that the police ensured that yesterday evening.
And as you talk about ways to prevent anti-Semitism, I noticed yesterday that when you put out a statement about the protest, in advance of the protest, you noted that you agreed with the protesters. You've weighed in on the subject of Israel in a couple of other ways in recent days. And I just wonder whether, are you considering whether you personally putting your views about Israel out there is in any way fueling anti-Semitism in the city? Do you ever think maybe you should just not weigh in or just not bring it up?
No, I think that critique of the policies of a government are very much separate from bigotry towards the people of a specific religious faith. And there is no tolerance for anti-Semitism. There is no tolerance for hatred of Jewish New Yorkers, which we have seen time and time again, whether it be in the graffitiing of swastikas on a number of homes across Queens recently. And I've also been clear to New Yorkers my honest opinions about the fact that when we have a real estate expo that is promoting the sale of land, which includes the sale of land in occupied West Bank in settlements that are a violation of international law, that is something that I firmly disagree with, and that I also believe that many New Yorkers firmly disagree with, because it has been at the heart of an ongoing effort to displace Palestinians from their homes.
Why do people find this acceptable? Why are they accepting such a statement by the mayor of New York City, even if you like him? I don't understand. Mamdani had a very easy moral test. He did not have to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He did not have to give a lecture on international law. I'm not even going to weigh in on the topic itself, but he did not have to weigh in on it. He did not have to endorse the real estate fair at the synagogue. No, he simply had to say, no synagogue should be surrounded by a violent and hateful crowd. He could have condemned the hate. He could have condemned the intimidation. He could have condemned the violence. He could have stood with Jewish New Yorkers, but he didn't. He didn't. Instead, he centered the criticism of Israel. Instead, he sided with the mob. He didn't say the mob was wrong in any way. He said, I agree with the mob. He said the mob has a good point of view. I side with my position is their position. That's what he's saying. When the mayor of New York City responds to a violent crowd outside of a Jewish house of worship by emphasizing the validity of their cause and by giving voice at the highest level to the mob's concerns and position, he's not being nuanced. He's not being understanding. He's giving them moral cover on a far bigger stage than the protesters themselves had, just in front of the synagogue and in front of some cameras. This is the mayor of New York City. Again, here's what Mayor Mamdani could have said. Okay, what we saw yesterday. Imagine this. Imagine if he had gone on CNN and all these other networks and said, what we saw yesterday was not a protest. It was a display of violence and hate. All New Yorkers and all people with any moral fiber should stand with me, the mayor of New York, in condemning what we witnessed. No political cause, whether we agree with it or not, justifies a violent crowd outside a synagogue. No Jew should be intimidated entering a house of worship. Whatever one thinks about Israeli policy, this was wrong. That's what he could have said. But he didn't say that. He most certainly didn't. Again, here's what he had to say. I think it's worth listening again.
Now, I think that critique of the policies of a government are very much separate from bigotry towards the people of a specific religious faith. And there's no tolerance for anti-Semitism. There's no tolerance for hatred of Jewish New Yorkers, which we have seen time and time again, whether it be in the graffitiing of swastikas on a number of homes across Queens recently. And I've also been clear to New Yorkers my honest opinions about the fact that when we have a real estate expo that is promoting the sale of land, which includes the sale of land in occupied West Bank in settlements that are a violation of international law, that is something that I firmly disagree with, and that I also believe that many New Yorkers firmly disagree with, because it has been at the heart of an ongoing effort to displace Palestinians from their homes.
It's not that he disagrees with Israeli policy that's the failure. It's not that he opposes settlements. It's not that he opposes sale of land in this region or that region. It's not that he has strong views about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The failure is that when Jews in New York Jews were intimidated outside a synagogue, he centered the grievance of the crowd rather than the safety of the Jews. I know many people like to throw around the term criticism of Israeli policy. Oh, you don't like criticism of Israeli policy. This is not a magic phrase. It's not a get out of jail free card. It shouldn't be. It's often used to turn intimidation, like what we just saw, into justice. It excuses the worst conduct, the conduct that we would otherwise condemn as a society. But a crowd gathers outside a synagogue, chants for the end of the Jewish state, and frightens Jews who are trying to enter a house of worship. The issue is no longer zoning, real estate, foreign policy. The issue is Jew hatred. A legitimate protest is specific. A hateful protest targets a people. A legitimate criticism addresses policy. A hateful movement turns Jews into symbols of evil. A legitimate protest does not require intimidating Jews trying to enter a house of worship. A legitimate protest does not require this many policemen holding them back by force before who knows what to those Jews, or who knows what to that house of worship. Now, some of you may say, yes, well, what Mamdani said was specific. What Mamdani said didn't target an entire people. It addressed policy. That's not the issue regarding Mamdani. The protesters is where I'm focused for just a moment. Back to Mamdani, though, regarding what I just said. He, as I said a little earlier, he failed that moral test. His job is not to weigh in on those issues of policy. So you may think, yeah, legitimate criticism of Israel, but that wasn't what he was being asked to address. He's not being asked to address whether or not Israel, this event, he agrees with this event in the synagogue. He's not being asked whether the protesters have a valid point. He was being asked, what do you think of what we saw last night? This is now a few weeks ago. And what he should have said, in no uncertain terms, is this is unacceptable behavior. You and I can share this. He should have said, you and I can share the same position, but you can't behave like that. But he didn't say that. Again, I keep underlining this. He didn't say these words of comfort or reassurance to the Jewish community. And what do you think the signal is to the protesters when they see the mayor of the city having absolutely no criticism of their conduct, and instead giving voice in the highest platform in the city to their grievances, to their cause? Here's the mayor of the largest, of New York City, agreeing with them on national television, on national news, and not saying anything bad about what they did. This is a green light, right? As long as police can do their job to stop you, you're okay. Unfortunately, because of this endorsement by Mayor Mamdani, these protesters, members of the mob, did not get the message that you do not get to hide behind the language of human rights while intimidating Jews in front of in their house of worship or on their way into the house of worship. That message is no longer received. The message they are not getting is you do not get to chant for the elimination of the Jewish state and then insist you are merely concerned with real estate. That's not the message they got. They also didn't get the message that you do not get to bring a mob to the doors of a synagogue and then demand credit for moral sophistication, for being on the right side of morality. Nope. That message wasn't received by those protesters, by the members of the mob, not by Mayor Mamdani. No, he didn't say, he didn't relay that message at all to the protesters. Instead, it's 2 thumbs up. There is a point at which the stated cause becomes secondary. If people are chanting against the existence of Israel, the very existence of the Jewish state, this is not about specific policy. If people are targeting a synagogue, this is not about land. If Jews need police protection to enter a house of worship, something has gone terribly wrong. I want to mention something that Naya Lecht has said. Naya Lecht is, by the way, someone you need to follow if you don't already on all the socials. Check her out. She's a very important voice. Now, she has said that Jew hatred always adapts and adapts to the moral language of the age. In religious times, Jews were accused in religious language, right? It was anti-Judaism. Middle Ages, early Christianity, Jew hatred, hatred of Judaism. Then in racial times, the language changed. Jews were accused in racial language. Think of the Nazis, inferior race. This is classic anti-Semitism. You went from anti-Judaism to anti-Semitism, a term coined by a Jew hater, by the way, Wilhelm Marr. And today, this has transformed again. It has mutated one more time in the language. And so when you accuse Jews today, people use the language of human rights, colonialism, liberation. That does not mean that every human rights accusation or argument is anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, if you want to use that word. It does mean that we must recognize that sometimes old hatred wears new clothing. Jew hatred changes its vocabulary. The structure remains. The Jew is cast as the moral criminal. And once Jews are cast as moral criminals, almost anything done to them can be rationalized. That is how harassment becomes activism. That is how intimidation becomes resistance. That is how a mob outside a synagogue becomes, in the minds of some people, a protest for justice. And that is why moral clarity matters. And even if you don't go with all of the arguments that I made, even if you don't, the message to having the mayor of New York City have nothing critical to say about the conduct of such a mob, of such a crowd, sends a clear message that intimidating is okay, that standing in front of a synagogue is okay, that the specter of violence is okay. Imagine being a Jew in New York watching all of this happen. Imagine seeing a crowd outside a synagogue, hearing chants that call for the end of the Jewish state, seeing masked protesters and police barricades, and then hearing your mayor focus his critique, his criticism, not on the mob, but on the event inside the Jewish house of worship, and essentially criticizing all who attended this event inside a synagogue and having absolutely nothing to say nothing critical to say about the protesters outside. What are Jews supposed to hear? That our safety is conditional? That our synagogues are fair game? That our fear is less important than someone else's rage? That we're protected only if we are the right kind of Jew? Only if we distance ourselves enough from the Jewish state? Only if we apologize enough? Jews should not have to pass a political purity test in order to be safe entering a house of worship. Again, this shouldn't be hard. Entering a house of worship should be easy, should not be an issue. Synagogue should not be targeted. Not a synagogue, not a mosque, not a church, not a temple. These places should not be targeted. If a mob gathered outside a mosque because of the actions of a Muslim majority country, decent people would understand the problem. If a mob gathered outside a church because of the actions of a Christian majority country, decent people would understand the problem. But when it is a synagogue, suddenly we're asked to appreciate the nuance. I don't appreciate the nuance. I don't appreciate the double standard. The standard should be universal. And if it's not applied to Jews, a universal standard, then it's not universal. You can't exclude us from these standards. You can't be selective. A selective moral outrage is often where anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, Jew bias hides. Now, let's get back to Mayor Mamdani, my favorite mayor in the United States. I don't know them all, so who knows what they all have to say, but he's certainly high profile. When a mayor cannot say the easy part, Jews are right to ask what he's really saying. This was not a protest. I've said it, but I want to underline it. This was not a protest against real estate. This was not a noble stand for justice. It was a hate rally outside a synagogue. And when Mayor Mamdani had the chance to criticize them, he chose not to. He could have condemned the mob. He didn't. He most certainly didn't. He supported them.